Black Magic Woman podcast acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on. We also acknowledge traditional owners of the land where you, the listener or viewer, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to our elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was Aboriginal land and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bayles.
Welcome to another episode of the Black Magic Woman podcast. My name is Mundanara Bayles and I am joining you from beautiful Gadigal country, and we're celebrating BlackCard's 10th birthday during NAIDOC week here on the lands where my ancestors once walked. The guest that I have with me today, a big shout out to our listeners and also now our viewers on YouTube, and a big shout out to our new audience and listeners around Australia, because we are now the first Aboriginal podcast on the iHeartRadio network.
Wow, congratulations.
And you can also listen to Black Magic Woman as part of Virgin's in-flight entertainment. So if you're flying home today, make sure you check us out. But look, I really want to get down to this yarn, and I've been waiting for about 3 years to have this yarn.
Hard to track me down.
Hard to track you down. Even in Garma, I grabbed him for 10 minutes and it was the best 10 minutes. And there's a lot of deadly people on that yarn, but I just want to say, Stan Grant, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on the Black Magic Woman podcast. Can you please introduce yourself to my listeners and viewers? Tell us a little bit about yourself, who your mob is, and where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up everywhere, really. My dad's Wirajduri, mum's Kamilaroi. I've also got Dharawal heritage as well from my great-great-grandfather, Frank Foster, who came from around La Perouse and then down the south coast. So my family's really connected right across New South Wales. I spent most of my childhood on the road. We moved around a lot. Dad was an itinerant labourer, sawmiller. Was always a big mob of us, cousins, uncles, aunties, my grandparents. We'd just move around from town to town. I suppose home was really Griffith, where I was born, and the Three Ways Bridge Aboriginal mission where my family lived, and we'd always go back and forward to Griffith. We'd move away for work and then go back again. So, my childhood was spent on the road and spent amongst my own people, with the support and love of my own people.
I can't help but think about your deadly father, Stan Grant Sr., who has been a trailblazer when it comes to Wiradjuri language.
Yeah.
Can you share with me a little bit about the fact that you have been speaking your Wirajduri language more and more? That I want to learn Wirajduri now so I can speak to you and Anita Heiss and all the other Wirajduri people.
There's a lot
you can
of
learn
us.
the language.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a story behind this. When my father was a young boy, his grandfather, my great-grandfather, Wilfred Johnson, whose name was Budjan Johnson, he spoke to my father in the main street of the town they lived in Wiradjuri, called out for him to go home, and the police overheard him and arrested him. They charged him with offensive language and took him to jail. And when he came out, he said to my father, I won't talk this language to you in the street ever again. We'll only do it out in the bush. And he took my father out in the bush and he taught him. And my father was one of the lucky ones. He was one of the last generation to be connected with those people who had lived lives almost untouched by white people, who had our culture, who had our language, who understood our dance and our ceremonies and our stories. And it was that connection that sustained my father. And it wasn't until many years later, when Dad was in his 50s, that a linguist came to him and said, I want to try to capture as much of the Wiradjuri language as possible. And he and Dad worked together. And over a 5-year period, they wrote the first Wiradjuri dictionary. They set up Wiradjuri language centres right across our country. Charles Sturt University today has a Wiradjuri language and culture program. And our people are speaking it again, and a new generation is speaking it. And what's really interesting too is that a lot of non-Aboriginal people are coming to it. So for the first time in over 200 years, white people are speaking our language on our country, which has been an incredible act of reconciliation, an incredible act of generosity from our people, and a way of imagining what we've been always talking about, imagining the country that we should be and bringing that country to life.
And talking about country, you actually lived overseas for the majority of your career,
years,
20 years overseas as a foreign correspondent.
Yeah.
I used to see you on the news.
Yeah.
And my dad said he's a black fella. And when you came back to Australia, in 2017, you was part of a debate, a race debate. And that video went viral. And if you have not watched the Australian Dream speech, it's on YouTube. I refer to it a lot. It's part of BlackCard's pre-reading. You share the love of the country. You love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains. I grew up on that country. My people were shot on that country. I know your speech off by heart.
Yes.
But what I want to ask you is, when you came back from 20 years overseas, had anything changed in your eyes in terms of, you know, the situation?
That's a really good question, because I think in many ways I'd changed. You know, I'd been away from Australia for 20 years. I lived in London, New York, Hong Kong, Beijing, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Islamabad, Baghdad, Jerusalem. And I'd reported from more than 80 countries. And I got to experience Australia outside of Australia. I got to experience living as a human being in the world in a way that I'd never been able to experience in my own country. In Australia, I always felt as if this was not a place that I could belong. And it was only looking back at Australia that I was able to find a language to imagine and be able to speak my country to myself, if that makes sense. I found Australia by not being in Australia. So when I came back, I looked at this country again with new eyes. It wasn't the eyes of a Wiradjuri boy growing up on the inside of this country, always feeling other people staring at us. I could look back at this country now and see it very clearly. If I'd spent all my time in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Pakistan, in China, if I'd looked at people suffering in other parts of the world, and I came back to this country which tells the world that we're a democracy and we're free and we're prosperous and we're tolerant and we're multicultural, I then have to ask myself, why are we failing my people? If Australia is all of those things, why do my people die young? Why are my people locked up in the numbers that we're locked up in? Why do our kids not have a chance? So on the one hand, Australia may be able to measure some improvement. We're sitting here today. There are more Aboriginal university graduates, more Aboriginal politicians, more Aboriginal businesses. But what has actually changed? Very little, structurally. So when I came to give that speech, I wanted to take the dream of Australia, the idea of Australia, and turn that on its head and say, what does it look like when you come from the other side of the dream? And living outside of this country gave me the words, the language and the vision to be able to see this country more clearly.
I absolutely love the way you describe this country. And I am speaking on behalf of thousands of people that have done BlackCard training, that they say that your words are so eloquent. You're getting across a very important message, but in a very eloquently way that makes, and I've seen it from my own eyes, makes grown men cry. So it's touching. And I think that's what you wanted to do, is you wanted to get people to feel.
First and foremost, Mundanara, our people are people of love. You don't survive in this country for tens of thousands of years, forever. As long as humanity has existed on this land, it has been us. You don't survive here forever without love. Our people don't survive 200 years of invasion and colonisation and suffering without love. Our people could not find the strength to go on and to fight for a better Australia without love. Our people have loved Australians when they have not had love for us. So everything I speak comes from a position of love. We have a word in Wirajduri, Yindyamarra. Yindyamarra means respect, but it means to respect even when those don't respect you. It means the respect that comes from knowing where you are, the country that you are from, what has given birth to us, our relationship with God, our relationship with our land, our relationship with our ancestors. If we know who we are, if we know where we are, we have the ability to build a better country. So people often hear us speak these words and speak these hard truths and become very defensive. They want to block these things out. They want to accuse us of attacking Australia. Nothing could be further from the truth. James Baldwin, the great black American writer, said, "I love America so much, that's why I have the right to criticise it. I love this country so much that I have the right to criticise it."
And by criticising and writing books, it has also cost, well, it hasn't cost you your career. You've chosen to walk away from a job that I could see watching, intense sometimes. I think I could never do that as a job. But I heard a lot of people say that you were the best host on Q&A. And before you know it, you're not there. You're not on that show, but we've still got you. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is going home. I heard you've gone back home to be on country.
Yeah.
What have you been up to? We haven't seen you, but what have you been up to? And is there anything that you want to share with our listeners and viewers?
I've been reading and thinking and writing a lot. I've been back on my country a lot. I've been spending time with my family. I've been surrounding myself with my people. I've been surrounding myself with people of love. I've been surrounding myself with people who support me. We have the right to say no. We have the right to say no to the abuse that we receive. We have the right to say no, I will not participate in this. And we have the right to be who we are in this country. And I've been reclaiming that, reclaiming the right to be who I am. You know, I've spent 40 years in journalism having to be something else, having to live in a world and work in a business that was not designed for me, for us. There were no other Aboriginal people when I came into the newsroom. There were no other Aboriginal people working in Parliament House when I worked there as a political reporter. When I went overseas as a foreign correspondent, there were no Aboriginal people. But I carried with me my own people. I carried with me your father, Tiger, who busted down the doors and took our voices onto the airwaves. I took the people like John Newfong, an Aboriginal journalist who wrote for the Australian newspaper when there was no one else doing that. You know, I have struggled to carve out a place for myself, but I had to also accept that sometimes, in spite of all the effort, in spite of all the hard work, in spite of all the success, sometimes it's still not a place for us. And the media right now is not a place for me. And I don't want to participate in a media that can do so much damage to us and repeatedly does damage to our people. I want to imagine a media that can build a better country, not tear down the country, that can bring people together, not keep people apart. And that's what I want to work towards. If I work in the media in the future, it will be to build things, not to bring things down.
I want to end on a really positive note and say for a lot of our mob that are still working in mainstream media as the only Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person in those newsrooms, what would you say to them? They're still there. They haven't given up. What would some of your advice be to them? Because you've had 40 years at it.
Yeah. You know, my advice would be to know that it's hard. It is always going to be hard. I don't need to tell you, Mundanara, you know how hard it can be. You know the struggle of your parents, you know the struggle of your grandparents and your great-grandparents, the struggle of your family, the struggle to build your business. And you have worked to make not just our community better, but our country better. Our country better. It's hard, and it's always going to be hard. We have to be not just twice as good, but 10 times as good. I decided when I came into journalism that I would work harder, arrive earlier, stay later, read more. I would be better than everybody else. I would not fail because of a lack of effort. I would not fail because of a lack of determination. And I would every day count my blessings that I am where my ancestors have put me. So I would say to people, it's going to be tough. But we come from tough people, and we can tough it out. And to remember this, there is always a place for us, and always a place for us to be us. Don't sacrifice who you are for someone else's idea of success. I have always strived to be who I am. When I was in New York, I was a Wirajduri person. When I was in London, I was a Wirajduri person. When I was in Jerusalem or Beijing or Islamabad or Pyongyang or Seoul or Tokyo or any of the places that I've lived and worked, I've been a Wirajduri person. We have the right to be who we are in the world.
Oh my goodness. So if that's not the best way to finish our yarn, I just want to say, Stan, and I've said it to you many, many times, but thank you. Thank you very much for still being here, for still being deadly, for still inspiring our mob to be the best that we can be. And just in terms of this country is a better country because people like you that write books and criticise it and speak about it, you keep doing what you do. And I can tell you now, I hope that my children, your grandchildren, live in a much more united and reconciled Australia. So thank you.
So. And can I just say, I want to say thank you to all of our elders. I want to say thank you to my parents. I want to say thank you to my grandparents and great-grandparents and those people who have sacrificed so much for us to be here. And I want to say thank you to you for all that you do, and thank you to your family for all your family has done in never flinching from the fight. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what an amazing opportunity for us to be sitting here in this room, to have you for an extra half hour, but also for our listeners and viewers of Black Magic Woman podcast. I know that you've been in for a treat. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like any more info on today's guest, please visit our show notes in the episode description. A big shout out to all you Deadly Mob and allies who continue to listen, watch and support our podcast. Your feedback means the world. You can rate and review the podcast on Apple and Spotify, or even head to our socials and YouTube channel and drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. The Black Magic Woman podcast is produced by Clint Curtis.